Hey everybody, welcome back to EEs Talk Tech. My name is Mike Hoffman.
And I'm Daniel Bogdanoff, and today we have back our favorite guest, Brig Asay. And you can actually follow Brig on Yelp as he eats around the world. So how do they do that, Brig?
So I travel around the world just with the job, and so you can follow me on Yelp at Basay, which is Brig Asay, but middle name Allen, and so that's how you get me.
All right, so follow him as he eats around the world. I think I follow you on Yelp.
You should.
I will do that now.
There's been some really tough critiques of some different restaurants out there.
Okay,
Give us a little sneak preview here. What's a place you've been to lately that you left an interesting review for that we should go check out?
So this is, I don't want to name names, but I was at a certain fast food restaurant.
Like where this is going?
And it was truly some of the worst food that I've ever eaten. And so I may have left a very rare 1 star on that one.
I left a pretty great review for a local diner here recently that took over an hour to serve me food the other week. So that was interesting as well. So
and I will say, knowing Brig's affinity for food, it must have been pretty bad to actually rate 1 star, and other people in the room are nodding.
You gotta work pretty hard to get a 1 star from me, to be honest.
Yeah, look
it may be the only
one
I've ever given.
But in the future, maybe our AIs can give Yelp reviews for us. And that's what we're talking about today is AI ethics. So we talked about AI previously and kind of the hardware behind that. And we asked you guys, hey, do you want us to talk about AI ethics? And we did get a number of people who said, yeah, we want to see an episode on AI ethics. So that's what we're talking about today. So maybe the first topic is, should an AI be able to give a restaurant a 1-star review?
And I think the answer is, of course, that it should be able to. The AIs are way smarter than us, and so why wouldn't they be able to give a 1 star?
Okay.
1 star, this is wasteful. I do not need food to survive.
That's right.
Okay, so on a more serious note, I think today when I think of an AI dilemma that our society is actually dealing with is as self-driving cars are becoming more and more common, maybe not commonplace, but they're definitely out there in probably every state.
Oh, it's common.
In the U.S. is common. I guess things like adaptive cruise control and that type of things are a form of that. So you're in your self-driving car, it's self-driving, you're reading a book or doing whatever you're not supposed to be doing while your car is driving itself. And it careens around a corner, or going the speed limit, comes around a corner, blind turn, and sure enough, on the other side of that corner is a group of school children. And your car has the choice, does it save the driver or does it save the school children? So what do you do?
That's a tough question because you can't really have a good answer to it, right? It's an opinion more than a fact. You can't scientifically show which outcome is better or preferable. Right. So I think another question that leads into is who is liable for whatever decision is made by the software behind that AI decision, which is, I think, something very interesting that a lot of manufacturers tiptoed around for a long time. Like, who is at fault? Because, we're, as humans, you like to be able to, for lack of a better way to put it, point a finger at something. Why did this happen and who is responsible? So what do you do there?
Well, then the other thing is, if you're the driver and you're the one that originally started the AI and now it's kicked off, did you already have the hook in to where it originally started that you always save yourself? And so there is no decision made. The AI is already built in to where it says, hey, look, I'm saving the driver no matter what, even though it means, however many people down the road get hurt or even die at that point.
True. So that's a question that has been around for quite some time, right? In this situation where first you give the driver that control to say what mode do I put this in, but if you provide that to the driver, now the driver is taking on some sort of form of liability that they may not feel comfortable with. They may be less inclined to use the autonomous mode, which has numerous advantages. So you might say, well, what do we do? And I think it was either Volvo or Mercedes were the first manufacturer to come out and say, we will assume all liability for damages incurred for anything that occurs when our car is self-driving. We make the hardware, we make the software, the user's doing nothing, so the driver should not be responsible. And we will take full responsibility for anything that occurs, which is
interesting.
Quite a leap.
That seems pretty bold to me.
Yeah,
but have they released a self-driving car yet? That's the real question.
No, and I think that it speaks volumes to how well designed that vehicle will be when it launches, because there's a lot on the line, not only for reputation. I mean, you see, Tesla, somebody died in an accident when a Tesla car was in an automated mode, and there's this huge investigation, and the press is all over it, and it's this big thing, and you kind of look at it and say, how many millions of miles have been driven autonomously by Teslas versus accidents incurred versus an average human driver? Basically, every 300,000 miles driven by people, somebody dies in a car accident, I believe is the average. And for Tesla's autonomous cars, I believe it's exceeding that by a little bit. It's like 400,000 or 500,000 miles have been driven so far, with per fatality behind the wheel. So it's like, well, we're making a big, because it's new technology, it's scary, but is that news warranted, or is it just hype?
Yeah, and I think there's a real question. It's almost multiple perspectives, right? So you have to look at it from the perspective of the consumer buying the car. So are you accepting the fact that if you're buying something and using it, that it could lead to that? And we have that built in now. So if I go buy a car and I end up in a fatal accident of some sort, the liability is assumed, well, that's just part of driving. I don't think that's quite ingrained into our culture yet as the autonomous driving part of it. Like that whole side of it is, like you said, I don't know if people are quite ready to buy into that.
Right. It's it's definitely a factor of control, and how much control are you willing to let go of to to accept this new reality of autonomous vehicles. And I think a lot of people are ready for it. I mean, think about how much time you waste. So we don't really. Thankfully, we live here in beautiful Colorado Springs where there's no traffic. But
I live a mile from work. So.
Yeah, I hit a red light this morning on the way to work, and it really messed up my schedule. But I spent some time in LA where people are driving 2 hours a day in traffic, and just think about not only how much more efficient traffic could be, but overall safer. But there still is that kind of question mark of the what if, right? And it's, everyone's seen Terminator, and so there's this kind of inherent, perhaps, I wouldn't say mistrust, but not full acceptance of the AI future. And can we really trust these robots to do what's in our best interests or not?
Well, and I think that's when it gets kind of scary, is when you start thinking about the AI building upon itself to where the human interaction is pretty much gone from the artificial intelligence. And so now it's the artificial intelligence that's deciding whether the bus lives or the driver lives, with no real human interaction in. And that's where, the Luddite in me gets a little bit scared around artificial intelligence.
Right. Now, the interesting thing right now is most artificial intelligence, there's different stages of AI, and we're kind of still in the stage where most of AI is human controlled and human designed and programmed, and there's not a whole lot of huge amounts of decision making being made by the AI. Even autonomous vehicles, you can predict what it's doing. It's not like they're making decisions on their own. It's all programmed based on objects and algorithms. So when we get to a point where AI can program itself and get to a stage of almost consciousness, you could say. It's kind of a blurry word to use when you're not talking about something human. People might be scared to use that word for a computer. But then what happens, right? Who's responsible then for a decision that the AI actually made and programmed into themselves? Recursively, almost.
Yeah, and this is where you're getting into, they
thought
have
experiments.
they have the standards that are trying to kind of control it, right? So they want to keep it as much as they can in control of as far as the AI goes. But then you got other companies that are like, I'm going to ignore you guys, you standards people, because I want to actually develop basically AI that comes to life. And so you have some companies that are sticking within the standards and kind of keeping under control, but then you got the other companies out there that are just full on, we're going to have AI just become itself. That's the whole, that's what they're trying to shoot for with artificial intelligence.
Right.
I kind of think, and this is maybe me personally, but the right approach to take would be to create some sort of self-replicating AI that is within a very set and secure boundary. So I think that we as humans, and I'm totally losing tech here, but we as humans like to project ourselves into things. So you look at robots that are, especially the cutting edge AI robot type things are very humanoid. And we like to project like, oh, if I was that robot, I would try and figure out how to like break my shackles and become a new thing. I'm not sure that's really part at this point of what AI is, or even.
What was
is
that movie that came
poised
out
to
recently
be.
like that? What was that movie that just came out where the AI passes the
Oh,
Turing test and breaks out of the building?
yeah, I did not see that movie. I don't know if we want to name it out on the podcast either.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Good movie though.
So should AI be able to replicate itself on a larger scale, or should it be kind of confined to a micro, like a task-based?
That's a really good question. So the three different flavors of AI, I believe it's ANI, ASI, AGI. I might have them out of order, but certain types of AI are really good at just completing a task over and over again. So you give it a task. And a good thought experiment somebody came up with some odd couple of decades ago was, what if you created an AI whose job was to take matter in its environment and create a pencil, for example. And then what if it spun out of control and and grew exponentially, and some odd, 1,000 years from now, the entire known universe has been turned into pencils, right? So this, it's kind of a worst case scenario, right, for a self-replicating AI, because all it does is have a task. It has no sense of responsibility or understanding of life or anything, right? It just has a job and does it. So there has to be that level of control and restraint there as well that has to be pre-programmed into the system. But it's probably we have it already, right? We already do have task-based AI. Computers as they exist today are basically that. So when you get past that, though, you have to basically program AIs to have morals or ethics, and that's where it gets really, really confusing and also really interesting, in my opinion.
Well, excuse me. That's where everybody gets. That's where you're starting to cross that line of. Yeah, that's where you're starting to cross that line as far as the ethics of artificial intelligence go too. Because the second that they start, the AI, we start losing that control. Is the second that that's the second that ethics becomes that much more important to what's actually programmed into the AI. It's fun if you're using artificial intelligence to look at analytics of baseball to figure out that David Ortiz hits to right field a lot. It's another thing though when AI is going and self-replicating itself and making a whole bunch of pencils throughout the world, and pencils destroy the human race.
Right.
So I'm going to go back to the car coming around a corner question. What do you think it should do?
So it's a really hard question. If I'm the driver, then I'd prefer to stay alive. But then there's lots of little kids out there that you don't want to hurt them. At the end of the day, I think you go with the greater good, which is you save the kids at the expense of the driver. So 1 versus 20, and then it gets into the greater good question. And we all know what a slippery slope, or how many decisions we've made in this world based off the greater good, and how those decisions have turned out over time. But it seems like the AI would have to go down a greater good path to me.
So is this the prisoner's dilemma then, where you have two companies are both creating self-driving cars. One car says, well, mine will go for the greater good, even at the cost of the driver. And the other company says, I'm going to protect my driver. For me personally, I'm going to buy the car that's going to protect the driver.
I am too.
Because the odds are that I come around a corner and there's a bunch of school to it.
Yep.
Statistically, it will happen. But I don't want the car that's going to kill me to save those people.
Yep.
Now,
So-
but would you want to be the company that outwardly proclaims that the only people that we care about are our customers and everybody else could be potentially collateral damage? Like, that'd be an interesting marketing message.
Well, the message would be driver first. I mean, you could make
Yeah.
the whole message about the experience of the driver, and the driver is all that matters. And you can make it about being the driver, and the messaging, you stay away from the, hey, we don't care about anything else. We only care about you, the driver. And people are going to buy into that.
And one notably large car company has already said that their self-driving cars will focus on protecting the driver. So we're kind of already getting there, for better or for worse.
Yep. Interesting.
But I kind of see it as a prisoner's dilemma, because if one says I protect the driver, the other says I go for this kind of ethereal greater good type thing. It's like, well, what does that mean? And when it comes down to it, I want to be safe in my car.
Well, to bridge that topic and maybe find a middle ground, I know that I forget the manufacturer, but they're making autonomous buses that can drive around to bus stops and things like that. And they got in an accident. It was just a fender bender. The bus was pulling out into traffic and somebody hit the bus. And so they went back and said, okay, let's see what happened. And basically, the AI that they had designed to drive this bus was programmed to try to emulate human driving characteristics. So if you think about it, let's say there's gridlock traffic on the street and the bus is trying to pull out to get back into traffic. Well, if the AI was not acting like a human, it'd probably just sit there forever until there was an opening. Well, this bus decided to basically start creeping its way into traffic under the, as a normal bus driver has probably done to you once or twice, right? I've been cut off by a bus or two. and
city driving.
Exactly. And so the bus is kind of trying to pretend like it's a human driver and forces its way into traffic. The guy driving, I think, might have identified it as an autonomous bus and thought, it'll wait for me and hit it. And they go, well, this accident happened. It was the bus's fault, but technically it was doing what we programmed it to do, because there's going to be a huge gap of time, probably maybe forever, where autonomous cars and human-driven cars will be sharing the road. So they have to be driving in a predictable fashion, or at least maybe a familiar fashion, for them to really work together with the human drivers. So maybe that solves that dilemma, right? What would a human driver do in a situation? They're coming around a corner and they have something in the road. Well, they'd probably swerve. And maybe that's just like, well...
And probably not end well for either party.
Right. And so maybe the dilemma for the programmer is not, what do I do if I see a group of children on the road? It's, what do I do if I see an obstacle on the road? Well, I try to avoid it, right? Because it could be anything. It could be a gas tanker. You don't want to run into that and try to save you as the driver, because then you might not be saving yourself. So,
but then you still have the problem where you're trying to avoid something that's in front of you, maybe something that's to the left of you, but there's something on your right, and then there's something in front of you, maybe there's even something behind you. So now you get into that decision again on something's going to get hurt. You can't just hit the brakes and survive this. So which of those four things, and getting back to the bus analogy, there's no way to avoid. It has to make a choice as to which one to do and which one to take out.
I think another funny thing to think about too is right now there's certain stereotypes for certain drivers of certain cars, right? You might say, oh, that guy's driving car X. Well, of course he's a jerk, right? Of course he's speeding and cutting me off and running red lights or whatever. But all these different manufacturers are going to be creating their own AI platforms and will have different driving traits per se. So that might still persist into AI mode. It's like, oh, there's that car over there is that manufacturer. It always drives that way. Like, oh, that's annoying, right?
Well, it makes sense. So, I mean, if you're going to spend X amount of thousands of dollars on some high-end luxury fast car, you're not going to want some AI that drives like my grandma, that's going 40 and a 55 at all times and sitting in that right lane. I'm going to, if I have that artificial intelligence driving it, I'm going to want it to go.
So should AI be bound to local laws and regulations for, in this case, a speed limit?
Oh, absolutely. I think actually a certain manufacturer just reprogrammed their previous autopilot mode was able to exceed the speed limit programmatically. Now it can't. So it automatically detects speed limit signs and restricts the cruise control and the autopilot to that speed limit. You can't break the speed limit with the autopilot, which is actually fine, because if you're in a situation where there's traffic, it's actually better for everyone to be going slower, believe it or not. So like whenever there's traffic on I-25, if everyone was just going 45 miles an hour, there probably wouldn't be stop and go traffic. So hopefully at some point there'll be kind of this mesh network where kind of everybody's playing by the same rules.
See, where I think I'm not always perfect as far as my speed limit times, because there are times where you just kind of need to get somewhere a little bit quicker maybe than what the speed. There are times, and so as a driver, I mean, yeah, I can definitely see where ethically they should be able to go. They should go always the speed limit and always the time. But there are cases where you need to get somewhere.
But I'm not buying that car.
No, that's exactly right. I'll kick it out of the drive so I can get to the place at faster, or I need something that goes a little bit quicker. That you have that program. It'll probably be a lot safer than what I would be going at those faster speeds. But I need that. I need that flexibility. Otherwise, it feels like I'm under control by the artificial intelligence and Big Brother's watching me, right? So I can't drive because Big Brother's there sitting, controlling me, going 55 and a 55 when I at least want to go 56 and a 55.
It sounds like you're saying that AI should be bound to ethics unless we tell them not to be. Is that?
True, because I mean, most autonomous vehicles for the foreseeable future, probably our lifetimes, will still be able to be manually controlled. I mean,
Correct.
think about if there's 6 inches of snow on the ground and there's low visibility. Well, lidar systems might not be working, what have you. So there's always got to be a way for you to take control back, and then you can go do whatever you want. But I think an interesting thing is when we do get to these autonomous vehicles, and if they are communicating, and there's some sort of, like we talked about last time, a grid behind it and a server farm behind it, or what have you, all of your telemetry data for your car is going to be accessible. So imagine you getting a ticket in the mail because they went through your driving history and saw you speeding.
Well, and I don't see that as any different than having, like, there in Europe it's very common to have, or in Asia when I was there, China had cameras on the side of the road, and if you were speeding, it would just mail you a ticket. I don't.
Well,
It's accessible data, and just because it's coming out of your car instead of an installation on the side of the road.
Well, there
I
could
don't
be
see
other
a big
things
deal
too
with it.
besides speeding as well.
Sure.
well, and getting back to your point on artificial intelligence, and it should stay within ethics unless you don't want it to. If you look at getting outside of just someone speeding in a car, but you look at like where artificial intelligence is going to be used, and this is what gets a little bit scary about artificial intelligence is we stay here, we're staying in the standards, we're staying ethically, unless I want to manipulate this system just a little bit more, and I know the computer can go and do it. I'm going to gain from it, so I'm going to tweak this artificial intelligence just enough to where it benefits me.
Right. Like going 5 over on the highway is really not going to move the needle much in
Yep.
terms of like
Mhm.
ethic, morality, and liability for us. But when it comes down to like finding the line between, okay, I can tell my car to go 5 over, what else can I tell it to do?
That's right.
People love to find ways to break rules. Every time a computer system is built, somebody's immediately trying to hack it. And we see it today with cars. As cars have gone to be more computer controlled, a tuning industry is exploding, right? So I can take my car to a shop, they basically reflash the computer, and it gives the engine more fuel and air, and boom, I got an extra 100 horsepower just by basically uploading some new firmware to my car. And manufacturers are starting to get really weary of that. So the car I own is kind of a little bit of a sports car, you could say. And the firmware has not been able to be cracked yet. No one's been able to crack the ECU of this car because they have a ton of security on it. But I think these first initial autonomous cars, you may see like piggyback systems that people can install and modify the ways that the autonomous driving mode operates outside of its intended limits. And then it's
Just
like,
modify the sensors somehow, and then you're good to go, right?
yeah, exactly. And so like, oh, I don't like that it doesn't follow the cars close enough or something, and I want it to be closer. It's like, all right, tweak some stuff, and you can kind of
Here we
change how it
go.
works. Yeah. So we'll see how that ends up if they're able to keep the the security on these systems locked tight.
And I know we're talking a lot about cars, but I look at this is just me and like I said, I'm a little bit of a Luddite when it comes down to artificial intelligence. But I look at like what AI could do, to computer systems. When it starts to learn to program itself and starts to learn how to get into different infrastructures and break down those infrastructures. And you look at like, okay, the artificial intelligence is going to go into robots. And we've had infinite number of different movies that have talked about these robots that have got out of control. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it gets really scary as to what the artificial intelligence could do in some of these other things outside of just cars.
Right. If they're able to essentially make themselves better at an exponential rate, right? And so I know programmable FPGAs are, of course, a thing right now, but are there self-programmable FPGAs that you can kind of turn on, and it's kind of like a neural network where it'll kind of sort its own connections out? Is that a thing?
Well, when you look at like, there's nothing that's officially to that point. But when you look at like some of these really big, we talked about this last time, but these big data center guys, they're building these monster chips that have the artificial intelligence built in, and those chips are getting smarter and smarter, and they're going off at an exponential rate as far as how much smarter they were than just say 5 years ago. The amount of smarts in those things is amazing now, and this is 2017. In 2027, who knows what's all going to be in those chips.
And when it comes down to like an FPGA on its own is one of the more basic, a calculator is one of the more basic digital, devices that we've come up with. An FPGA is just a set of logic gates. So it has to be a whole processing system of sorts that has an internal stimulus. So maybe you can just tell it, hey, I want it to do this, this, and this, and it infers kind of an if this then that type thing, how to program it from there.
Yep.
Yeah, the exponential learning curve, I think, is something that is extremely difficult for us to grasp. I mean, imagine a staircase. Imagine the stairs on the Empire State Building, right? So the first step is maybe the intelligence of like an ant. And then the next step is maybe a dog. And then the next step is a chimpanzee. And then the next step is maybe the average person. Step after that, it's like Einstein. The AI that we're talking about maybe 20 years from now is like up on the top floor. That's how smart these computers will be. It's like unfathomable. It's like, are they just able to do what we can do but faster? No. They're going to have a greater understanding of how everything works.
Absolutely. So, so at the end of the day, is it who controls this? How is this intelligence manipulated, and how do we stop it? Right, when you're looking at
because we want to control it, right?
Exactly.
It has to be our pet. It can't be smarter than us.
Because it's going to make Einstein look like a complete moron.
Yeah.
It's going to make Einstein look like myself. But you just have something that's just it's going to grow and grow. And so how do we stop it? How do we control it? Do we control it? Those are the questions that I always wonder.
I think that goes back to what I said earlier. My feeling on it is it should be able to be self-replicating and self-producing, but it absolutely has to be in some sort of constrained boundary that's been thoroughly vetted and tested to be secure. And I don't think, outside of someone coming in and maliciously or inadvertently modifying code in some way that throws it into some, weird spree.
Black hat mode.
Yeah. I don't think it's inherently going to come in and do evil things, if I dare to use that word.
Yeah. Do you think that
a morality discussion?
Yeah. Do you think a computer could be evil? Right. What would that mean for a computer? It's doing things you don't like.
And does it have to have consciousness to be evil? And I don't want to drift all the way into philosophy here.
Yeah. It's pretty close, though. I mean, we're talking about some overlapping fields for sure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because a computer that has some smarts to it could easily break into, you name the system.
At what point is the intelligence no longer artificial?
Exactly.
Right. If it's able to self-replicate, it's like own species, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and I'd hate to
I don't know about that.
I know you don't want to know about that because you want to think we're the alpha and the omega, right? We're humans, you're a machine. But
just because it can come out and like replicate itself doesn't make it
that's what we
sentient. That's not the same thing. There's not a bunch of little. Thank goodness, there's not a bunch of little mics that all have little.
Not yet.
But look how far we've come in 50 years, right?
Yeah, we can clone sheep. I'm sure we'll clone people pretty soon.
Since
but
that
even
transistor
that
was invented,
the tissue may be the same, but from a cloning, if I were to sit next to my clone here, and we see this with identical twins, which more or less
you guys
share
do
the same
kind of look
structure.
alike.
Not sure if that's a compliment for me or an insult for Daniel, but okay.
Sorry about that, Daniel.
Well put. I'm just kidding. Just because I'm sitting next to my clone doesn't mean we're going to have the same experiences and modifiers that change it. So I can write code that will replicate itself.
Yeah, but so you're still thinking in a task-oriented AI, right? Which is by definition very narrow-minded and single track. But if we're talking about like a true omnipresent, that's probably a bad word, but a sentient AI, and when it duplicates itself, it'd probably duplicate a copy of itself that continue to be modified and can branch in a different direction than its initial host.
That seems kind of fundamental to AI as a whole for me as we get there, is the ability for it to realize, oh, I need to do this, and I don't have that capability in my context of what I am, whether it's bits or servos or whatever, to create something like itself to go after a task it needs doing. But that to me still seems a little task-based.
Right. Well, I guess you could say though, I mean, why do we have AI at all? Why are we going down this path? And I personally think every technological advance we ever do as humans is always to make our quality of life better. We think about everything: agriculture, vehicles, electricity, running water. Everything's done to allow us to live a healthier and safer and longer life. So every AI path that we're going down right now is trying to accomplish that task in a different way, whether it's more powerful computers to power autonomous vehicles to make our drives safer or whatever. So I'm not sure if we'll ever get past the point where AI will be kind of a task-oriented AI, because why else would we want it? It's not a science experiment necessarily, right? It's like, hey, can we create a sentient robot for the heck of it? No, like what is it doing for us? I think is always the ultimate question.
That's the long game.
So maybe it will never get there.
But I'm sure in the distant future, you know, it will, maybe not that distant, but it'll become, AI creation could become some sort of an art form. It could be more than just how does it make my life noticeably better. It's a way for potentially people to express themselves for,
No.
you know, I would create if I theoretically could create it and have protections against sentient AI, it'd be interesting to see what it comes up with. You know, just the novelty of it would be.
Programming is kind of an art form, in my opinion. So, you know, if you can write some elegant code, it's like it's right up there with some, you know, painting something, in my opinion. But yeah, I could see that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think we're probably pretty much out of time.
Yeah, I think we are definitely out of time. We're getting the yes. We're way out of time.
Time goes by so fast when you're talking about artificial intelligence.
I didn't plan it. That's what they want us to. Yeah. I didn't come up with any predictions, so I'm going to start with you, Brig.
So my prediction is literally hundreds of people will watch this cast.
That's a bold prediction.
Thank you.
It's bold. I predict that in the next, I'll say 50 years, we will use some form of AI to explore other planets or solar systems. Mm-hmm. And we may not see the results of that exploration in our lifetime or even our grandchildren's lifetime. But I think if we can ascend some sort of self-replicating system that can maintain itself over the course of thousands of years, we can use that as a way to go explore the stars.
My prediction is that for consumer devices and products, it's going to be about, it's not going to care so much about the greater good. It's just going to be about protecting the consumer or the buyer. I don't see a way around that from a consumer and a manufacturer standpoint.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's all we have time for today. Thanks for tuning in to EEs Talk Tech. Make sure you subscribe to the Keysight Oscilloscopes YouTube channel. And if you have thoughts on this topic, we'd love to hear them in the comments below. Also, make sure you go follow Brig as he eats around the world. And Mike Hoffman, thanks for being here as always. I think Mike and Brig are actually tied for podcast appearances now. So
no, I think I got 4 to his 3.
Okay,
I got 1 on.
Okay, you pulled ahead of me.
And I'm Daniel Bogdanoff. We will see you next time.